Guys, you're not gonna believe this. I found it. I found Erebus. Wait, why are you looking at me like that? Oh, right, you don't know. Okay, context time. So, a few million years ago, my people, or rather, our precursor civilization, had this little habit of building these things called seed worlds. The concept is simple. Take a bunch of creatures from one planet and put them on another. Sit back and watch the ecosystem develop. Now, the most famous of these was a plant called Erebus, which was seeded with various arthropods from Earth. Now, of course, when civilization collapsed, it was lost along with many other worlds. But no longer, for I have found it! But that's not all, for you see, in our absence, Erebus has churned out a sapient species. I present to you the Myrmex people, or in their language, Myrmic. So Erebus's physical conditions are conducive to very large insects, namely low gravity and high oxygen levels. As such, the insects on Erebus are huge, and the Myrmex are no exception. They are a sapient descendant of Earth's ants, roughly 1 meter tall when on all 6 legs. Their culture is heavily informed by their nature as a eusocial species, and while I can't cover everything due to time, I can at least tell you about their language, which I am dubbing Myrmic. So, full disclosure, I didn't have a whole lot of time to make this, so this presentation isn't exactly the most visually appealing, so we're just going to go with the standard black text on white background and... Oh, that text is wrong. Huh. Oh well. Anyways, so Myrmic does have a writing system, but it's entirely pheromone-based, and I don't have enough time to make a good visual representation of that, especially one that can be transferred over digital means, so as such, I think I'm just going to be approximating their phonology to be a modified Latin alphabet. I hope you can understand that. Just know that they do not write like this. Anyways, as for that modified Latin alphabet, here's roughly what that looks like. Here are some adapted consonants to be a bit of a better fit for humanoids. Mainly, you'll notice that the original Myrmic uses spiracular stops instead of nasal stops, and stridulations instead of trills. The consonants are, and this is the best of my approximation, m, n, p, t, k, b, n, b, g, t, k, ch, f, s, sh, h, y, b, and r. You might notice that all of these are unvoiced. And that is because Myrmics do not exactly have vocal cords the same way that us humanoids do. So, as such, that also manifests in their vowels. Again, I'm not going to pronounce these correctly, but their vowels are I, U, E, O, and A. Once again, you'll notice that most of these are rounded, and that is entirely because of how their facial anatomy works. They don't really have the ability to unround. But that's besides the point. Now that we have the rough phonology out of the way, let's talk about grammar. So, first off, Myrmic uses a VOS word order, with the subject being able to be dropped in some contexts. It is entirely head initial, except for negation, which will precede the entire clause that's being negated. Indirect objects are inflected and then treated as adverbs. We'll go more into detail on that later. Tense, aspect, and mood are all handled by a single particle after the verb. Once again, we'll go into that later. Conjugations are circumpositions, and very importantly, most nouns are mass nouns. You need to remember that Myrmics are a eusocial species. They live in colonies, so they see most things as parts of a larger whole. As such, it makes sense then that they see most nouns as mass nouns rather than count nouns. So, let's talk about their nouns, specifically word derivation and how their noun classes work. So the majority of the Myrmic lexicon consists of a few base words with several derivations that have related meanings. Also for nouns, these derivations align pretty much one-to-one with a noun class system. Let me go into some of these derivations with the example of their word for food, which is chem. So you've got the underived base form, chem, meaning food. There's an animate form, fairly self-explanatory. Chemcher would refer to livestock and prey animals. Then we have the collective form. This is one of the few exceptions to the whole everything is a mass noun rule. Because collectives are the whole that everything is a part of. And as such, they're one of the few things that aren't mass nouns, because they're one of the few things that can actually be counted. So in this case, Rechem refers to a large feast and the events surrounding them, like banquets. In the case of Heucher, which is the collective form of person, it refers to the entire colony. Then we have the modifier form, which it basically encompasses both adjectives and adverbs. So Hemsch means edible. There's a verb form, again self-explanatory. Gemert, meaning to eat. Sensory refers to sensations, usually smells and tastes, but also other things such as vision or sounds. So Gemfum refers to the umami taste you would get in a food. Locational is the other exception to the mass noun rule, because locations can't really be collectivized as easily as other things. So in this case, Tchechem refers to any location used for food storage, such as a, food storage chamber, or a larder, or a cellar. And then finally we have anatomical, which refers to body parts. In this case, Hemtus refers to the mouth. Now, all mass nouns have measure words standardized to their class. Hus for underived nouns, hr for both animates and anatomical nouns, and hum for sensory nouns. Now, this is probably obvious to most linguists, but it goes without saying that using a mass noun without its measure implies that you're referring to that noun as a whole, /concept, /collective, rather than any specific one. So in this case, hr refers to an entire population, but hr refers to a specific person. Now, as a result of this, only locational and collective nouns are ever pluralized, and they're marked for this by adding g as a suffix. So ch refers to a colony, but ch refers to colonies in the plural. Now, I mentioned inflections earlier, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to include an entire inflection chart for this. Instead, I'm just going to mark it in any glosses that may or may not show up later. But Myrmic nouns can inflect to become modifiers, which include the genitive case, self-explanatory, for relative direction, things like locative, ablative, but also a couple of others that don't really have a standardized form, and to indicate usage or assistance. Now, you might think this is just the instrumental case, but they also have a distinct case to indicate when something assisted in an action. I mentioned the tense aspect mood particle, or TAM particle for short, and that's true. Tense aspect and mood are all handled by a single particle placed after the verb. Tenses attach a prefix, aspects change the root, and moods attach a suffix. Now let's go a little bit more into detail. Now there are 6 tenses in Myrmic. Yes, you heard me, 6. And they're relative to the lifetime of the speaker, actually. There's 3 divisions of past tense. There's one for before the speaker's colony was founded, one for after the colony was founded but before the speaker's birth, and one for in the past but during the speaker's lifetime. There's a single present tense because I don't think it's even possible to subdivide that. And there are 2 future tenses, before and after the expected death of the speaker. Yeah, that's kinda morbid, not gonna lie. But hey, it's part of their grammar. There are 4 aspects. Habitual and nomic are treated the same way, and you're expected to differentiate between them based on context. Perfective, progressive, and inceptive. Fairly straightforward. There's also 4 moods. Obligative and imperative are also treated the same way, and you're expected to know based on context. Permissive, abilitative, and another mood that I'm dubbing cause and effect, as it splits the TAM particle into 2, each for different verbs. One to indicate cause and one to indicate effect. Myrmic pronouns are based on person and caste. There are simple distinctions between first, second, and third person, and then there's a caste distinction, which is based off of non-Myrmics, larva, worker, soldier, and elite. For those of you who don't know, that means queens and drones. Also, I should mention that there is no first-person non-Myrmics pronoun because they have never met another species that can talk, which might make speaking to them a little bit awkward, but I think you can get away with using worker pronouns since that is their default. And then there's the word re, which can be used as a pronoun or a demonstrative depending on context. If this confuses you at all and you speak Tokipono, just think of how it uses the word ni. Finally, there's other parts of speech. Rt is a catch-all capula, usually used for general statements of being. The word hun is used for questions, and you place it into whatever part of the sentence you are asking about, and then derive it accordingly. So, for instance, if you're asking, what did the person do? You're asking about a verb, so you'd replace the verb of the sentence with hun derived into verb form. So it would be hnert. Finally, all conjugations are circumpositions, meaning they comprise of two words, one placed before the list of items and one after. So if you were saying people and wasps, for example, you'd have to say re, shen, with re and ha being the circumpositions. Now then, to demonstrate how much of Myrmic I have learned, I will be translating a rather famous passage. However, there's a bit of a problem here. This text references a lot of earth creatures and anatomies that Myrmics have no reference of. As such, I think it's best to adapt it slightly. I hope that's still acceptable.
Nerdgeshin kemtos ngas, emtos nara, sharchin hertos ngas, atentos nara, at nerchin nastos ngas, sharintos nare, hemerchin rub ngas, shekaki re. Hemert eschverjöher, hemert brun re, hemert fus raskinch re, re verjöher, hemert kemtus. Rasfum hifsk kagish nger. Taranetsk re riptest n per. Riptest n chehim he.